Welcome to Solidarity Speaks with the Green Olive Collective, Center for Jewish Nonviolence, All That's Left, Achbat Amim, and the Migrant, Immigrant, and Refugee Rights Alliance, an emergency webinar series giving people around the world a forum to hear directly from Palestinians and Israelis about the ways their communities are being impacted by the events of the last weeks, about the continuing violence, and about the urgent need for a permanent ceasefire, a release of all the hostages, and an end to collective punishment in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. My name is Aris, and I'm the Communications and Membership Director of the Green Olive Collective, a binational advocacy, information, and tour guiding center committed to a democratic future and an end to the ongoing displacement of Palestinians. We provide communities around the world with insights into the oppressive policies of the occupation and the resources to engage in meaningful advocacy and solidarity with Palestinian and Israeli human rights defenders. We are joining together today and weekly through this emergency webinar series as a global community of solidarity across borders. The current political establishment does all it can to separate Israelis and Palestinians, to isolate them from each other, and contain them in physical and imaginative cantons whose borders cannot be breached. We intend these weekly gatherings as a breach of those borders and an expression of solidarity, empathy, and common cause against the limits of the dominant discourse set by Biden and Netanyahu. Since October 7th, an environment of severe repression, intimidation, and censure has taken hold, as no doubt many of you are aware. In the Gaza Strip, a lethal military campaign has resumed following a temporary ceasefire. In Area C of the West Bank, communities face imminent expulsion from settler militias, and communities from the Gaza envelope and the families of the hostages continue to be treated with neglect and contempt by the Israeli government. I am very grateful to have with us today my colleague Itamar Shapira from the Green Olive Collective for an emergency briefing about the status of Masafer Yatta in Area C of the occupied West Bank. Itamar is completing his thesis about Masafer Yatta at Haifa University and is currently participating in direct solidarity, emergency response, overnight shifts, and protective presence efforts in Masafer Yatta in the South Hebron Hills, where settler militias are threatening communities with imminent displacement, villages are under military lockdown, and residents are facing mass eviction in firing zone 918. He will provide us with some geopolitical perspective about Area C and Masafer Yatta. He will discuss diplomatic and grassroots activity in the region since the war began and share personal reflections based on his recent work and years of experience in Combatants for Peace, Breaking the Silence, Green Olive Tours, and other justice initiatives. I've known him to be a sincere and dedicated activist, and I'm grateful he's here to speak with us. So thank you, Itamar, and I'll pass it to you in just 1 second. The last thing I'll say is that for everyone who has joined today, as Itamar is speaking with us and sharing, feel free to send questions in the chat. Just write question at the start with a colon or a dash so I know what to look for it, and then we can integrate your questions into the question and answer period at the end. So with that, thank you again, Itamar, and I'll pass it to you. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Aris, and hello, everyone. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm glad to participate in these webinars. I'll introduce myself and then I'll go into the current situation. So my name is Itamar Shapira. I'm 43 years old, pretty old already. I'm an Israeli Jew, has to be said, probably. I'm not practicing, but I was born here and raised here. My parents born here. My grandparents arrived from Europe, so I'm an Ashkenazi Jew. In Israel, it makes also a difference where your background is, of course. So I grew up here, went to the military, was a liberal Zionist, as people call it, or left-wing Zionist. Went out of the military during the second Intifada of the year 2000. Intifada is an uprising. It's the second one. The first one was in 88, 87 to 90. and the second one started in 2000, ended somewhere in 2003. And the second one was when I was in my military service. This is where I started to understand what it means, occupation, because I knew this word all along, but I didn't really know what it means. And I think I'm saying this so you understand that most people in Israel don't really understand what it means in terms of social, political rights for Palestinians in different areas, what is the difference, and so on. This is, of course, this ignorance is a big part of what is happening in the political atmosphere that we are at. After my military service in 2002, I started to become more knowledgeable, decided to refuse in a certain moment to continue to serve as a reserve duty soldier, and started to join Breaking the Silence, soldiers who speak about what we've done and our practices inside as soldiers, as occupiers. And a year later, 2005, I was part of an initiative that is called Combatants for Peace. Maybe some of you heard about it. It's Israeli soldiers that refuse to continue to serve as soldiers, so ex-soldiers and ex-prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, that sat in Israeli jails for activities against Israeli occupation. What we would consider in the beginning terrorists, of course, in the beginning of our meetings. And it took about a year until we established an organization, a movement that brings together Israelis and Palestinians for nonviolent direct action against the occupation in order to establish two states. And this was back in 2005. I left it somewhere in 2009. I'm a tour guide. I focus a lot about these issues when we take tours in Green Olive Tours and by myself. I was also a tour guide in the Holocaust Museum of Yad Vashem. I was, sorry, I have some noises here behind. I'm going to just very quickly close. Sorry for that. 2009, I was sacked out of the Holocaust Museum because I connected the collective memory of the trauma to the collective memory, the trauma and the collective memory of the Holocaust to the trauma and the collective memory of the Nakba, the Palestinian ethnic cleansing of 1948, of which I knew basically nothing until I was 26, 7, 8, somewhere there. Something that, of course, has a lot of importance also today and until today, because most of Gaza are Palestinian refugees from the ethnic cleansing of 1948, the Nakba. So I connected these dots, and I was sacked from Yad Vashem, and continued to guide the alternative tours also about the Holocaust and also about the Israeli occupation. I try to focus also on not only of understanding the realities, but trying to frame them in a way that is easy to understand, easy to know what's the situation, because I come from a background of feeling that I was living in ignorance, in very directive ignorance. The other thing is really to focus on the narratives that we all hold here as Israelis, Palestinians of all sorts. And today I take it into an anthropological study, a research for my MA, for my thesis, and it is about Israeli solidarity activists that live in South Hebron Hills, in the south of the West Bank, in an area that is called Masafer Yatta, of shepherds, communities of Palestinians in Area C, an area that is fully controlled by Israel. I'll soon go into that. And these Israeli activists that come there, they live with within the Palestinian villages, alongside Palestinians, and try to use their privileged status as Jews here to protect Palestinians from the ongoing ethnic cleansing in Area C. This study has suddenly changed a lot because I was supposed to already write it and finish by somewhere around November. And while I was writing, October 7th happened, and the field changed radically. Area C is most of the West Bank. It is 62% of the West Bank. It's the only area that you actually have continuity of. So during the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were drawn three kinds of areas, A, B, and C. In Area A, the Palestinian Authority is supposed to have full control, meaning not only civil control, but also military control. In Area B, only civil control. In Area C, an Israeli stays under Israeli occupation until, in a temporary way, until the final contract, the final peace agreement should come. This temporary situation actually became the permanent situation. And what it means is that the West Bank has most of its Palestinian population inside Area A and B, something like 90-something%, 95% of the Palestinians in the West Bank. Let's focus on the West Bank now, not the Gaza Strip. About 3 million Palestinians live in the West Bank. Most of them, 2.7, 2.8, live inside areas A and B, which the Palestinian Authority has to take care of. But the Palestinian Authority is not a free, independent entity. So they don't actually have the possibility to really take care of them. They cannot arrive everywhere they want. They cannot, of course, defend them. They don't have access to water to go in between the little islands that areas A and B constitute. And the only area that is not made as islands is Area C. This is the area that stayed with all the open land, with all the military base camps, and with all the settlements. So it's basically all the reserve land. And we have Area A and B as a concentration of population without a lot of space and without effective democratic rule. So the West Bank stays under full Israeli control, but the fact that the Palestinian Authority manages the majority of the population in civil affairs, some of the civil affairs, gives it the kind of a pretense or an image as if it is independent state. But nothing could be farther away. The Palestinians still use Israeli shekels. They pay the VAT, the taxes to Israel. Israel controls all of the registration of all the people that are there. We control the area with secret services, knowing every house, every person, his affiliations, where he grew up, what he wants to do, where he's going to go. And it is enacted by very brutal secret service control over also the Palestinians that live in Area A and B. However, since these areas are so dense with population, with Palestinian population, and they constitute only 38% of the land of the West Bank, most of the concentration of both the Israeli state and the settlers is to remove Palestinians from Area C. Area C, as we said, is completely under Israeli rule, so there's no Palestinian Authority in the way. It is where you have the settlements, you have the base camps, and you have all of the reserve open land.
Would it be helpful if I shared screen and showed a map of Area C, or would you prefer me to?
Yeah, let's do that. If you can, that would be nice. So continue speaking and you'll do that. That's nice.
Can you see?
Oh, very nice. So here, do you see? No, you don't see my. You see Jerusalem in the middle. Can you spot Jerusalem in the middle? And then you see Bethlehem below it, Hebron down below that, and then the South Hebron Hills goes below this one. So the red area is Area C, 62% of the West Bank, the only area with continuity, and areas A and B are these white islands. This is where Palestinians are supposedly free. So they're not really free. They don't have the right to move between these islands, but more or less in these islands, the military goes into a little less and allows the Palestinian Authority mostly to run its business. In the northern parts, in the area of Nablus and Tulkarem, I'm sorry, in these areas, the Israeli military just goes into area A and B all the time, attacking there and killing many civilians there. In the southern area where we are going to concentrate now, where I live, where I do my research, where I go and live with Palestinians there, with the Israeli activists, there is less violence than in the northern parts. And we are talking about a more deserty area, more desert, with shepherd communities that live in half caves, shacks, or little houses built outside of caves. A very poor population, that not even all of it is really identifying strongly with the national cause of Palestinians. Some yes and some not. Unlike the north, that they are a lot more Palestinian driven and so on. The cities are more nationalist. The villages in the south are a little less. This means also that they are less defending themselves, definitely not in an armed way. This allows the Israeli solidarity activists that I'm a part of to live in those villages, knowing that the Palestinians next to us are not involved in armed resistance against the occupation. And this allows us to be there in many ways, because when you have armed resistance, the way that the military answers that is with with very severe violence. During I would say the 20 years that I've been in that area, since 2004 or 5, going to accompany shepherds in areas next to settlements, you would always have some sort of a dynamic that the settlers are trying to push forward into these grazing lands of the Palestinians, or grazing lands or agricultural lands, and just take over them. The settlers, of course, are armed. The Palestinians there are not armed. The settlers are armed by the military, but they're not fully part of the military. Their idea is to take more land, to expand. They call this the Judaization of the land. They understand that the settlers there, a very radical ideology of, it's not only expansionism, it's the idea that this land has to be Jewish. And Jewish, it means that it has to be settled by Jews, and land has to be taken away from non-Jews, Palestinians in this case. In many cases, they do that almost without a lot of problem. They just go in with their herds, and the Palestinians are just afraid to go in. If the Palestinians do go in, they might be beaten up, or after they're beaten up, sometimes shot, the settler can call the police and just say that he was attacked by a Palestinian. A word of a Palestinian versus a word of an Israeli settler is extremely incomparable, basically. And therefore, Palestinians will be beaten up and then arrested by the military that will arrive to that area. This was the case for about 20 years that I was there. It took place before. But in the last 20 years, since the 90s, since the Oslo Accords, it became very pressing for the settlers to take over more and more lands before a final agreement is made by the Oslo agreements. That never came, of course. And therefore, being there as a solidarity activist would make things a lot better for Palestinians, because a word of us as the superior race, if you want, the superior ethnicity with full Israeli rights, just allows us to say to the cop, hey, no, it's not true. This settler just came in and bit this man up, and it's not his area, and we have a lawyer, etc., etc. We will be not taken immediately as, the ones with the right, but we have a lot more say than the Palestinians. And that was kind of the situation during these 20 years. It was on and off, a little more, a little less violence. But something radically has changed in October 7th, when the Hamas did its terrible attack from Gaza to the envelope of Gaza, murdering about 1,200 Israelis, many of them civilians. And this is, of course, brought a lot of rage to many Israelis. And these settlers over there are already full of a lot of rage towards these Palestinians. Plus, they have this religious vocation of taking the land and Judaizing it. And that was kind of a moment that everything opened up for them. The military was called, all of it, to Gaza, and stopped ruling the West Bank. Basically, it didn't stop ruling it, of course, but the ordinary presence of the military was suddenly gone. I'm sorry for a little congestion. Because everyone just went to Gaza for what's going to happen there. And the south of the West Bank, where we are at, as we said, is a lot less dangerous for the Israeli military because there is no armed resistance there. So in effect, when the military mostly left, not all of it, of course, but those that became the rulers of the land were the settlers. They are the armed ones. And settler, it's called quick response squads. That's my translation. Maybe Aris has a better one. It's little squads that are armed by the military, but it's local settlers that are supposed to protect their own settlements. And of course, settlements are built in a very kind of a castle way. I don't know, a very, how would you say that, fortified way. Unlike the Palestinian villages that are opened up and they don't have any surrounding fence or anything. Settlers have cameras and gates and so on. And now, as the military left, it left the settlers with squads that have the military weapons, the military uniform, the military jeeps, the military communication system. But now the soldiers were the settlers themselves. So if before we would have a violent settler arriving to us, to the Palestinian, that we as Israeli solidarity activists come along and help, and then we would call the police, that would call the military to come and kind of, do its justice, so to speak. And of course, it wasn't justice, but it was at least something a little more formal as the military arrived to situations in confrontation with settlers. Now the settlers were the ones in power. There was no one to call to. And what we had from October 7th to October 28th was night raids, not only into the grazing lands, agricultural lands like before, but now into the villages themselves in the middle of the night, shooting in the air, entering into houses, pointing guns into faces of people, destroying the house, just kind of trashing everything, shouting, taking out people, um, uh, tying people, standing on their heads with a gun pointed to their heads, saying we're going to kill you. All sorts of trashing cars, stealing a lot of money. Very, very frightening moments. And it started to happen that you actually had settlers shooting and shooting at people. A friend of mine was shot in the belly from zero, didn't have any gun, didn't have anything. A settler just walks up to him inside a Palestinian village, just shoots him, goes back. The fear was extreme. The Palestinians could not leave their villages, going on to the main road, going to take food, going to hospital, anything that you need to go was forbidden by both these settler soldiers, but also by the police that we did call and said, no, Palestinians on the road will be just shot to death. Palestinians are now, for 2 months already, under closure, curfew. They cannot go out of their villages. And slowly, more and more Palestinians have started to flee from these little villages and go into area A and B, where you have larger population of Palestinians, leaving their villages behind as the tractors and of the settlers are just going and demolishing all the houses and making it part of a growing expansion in settlers. We already speak about, I kind of lost count, but it's somewhere around 20 little villages, some of them of 50 people, some of 100, 150. So something between 15 and 20 villages have already been removed. We have jumped right in when we, well, it's not right in actually, it took a week or so of us also being, us, I'm saying Israeli solidarity activists, being a little bit terrified. And once we arrived, we started to see that when we are staying inside a village, we can kind of de-escalate the situation to be somewhat more bearable. In some cases, you started to see that when we go to a place, I just go to another village that night because we don't have enough people. We're talking about 12, 15 people at a time there. So we have 3 people in each little village. So we can cover 3, 4, 5 little villages, and the rest are left to their own. What happened in October 28th is that they came and did that to the village of Susia. The village of Susia is not one of those little villages of 50, 60, 70 people, but rather one of 200 people, and one that is has a very important activist, Palestinian activist, non-violent activist. His name is Nasser Nawaja, that works also from B'Tselem, very known around the world, just got a reward for his activities about 6 months ago. A sweet man that educates his children that the nonviolent route is a lot more effective in many ways to protect lives of Palestinians. When they arrived in his village, not to his family, but to a different family in the same village, when they came and they did, the settlers have done one of those horrific raids when they tied the men and kicked them and shot and burned the houses. And it was a night like that in the end of it, they just said, 24 hours, we come back tomorrow. And if you're not gone, we're going to kill you all. This is the same tactic that helped them to remove all the villages until that point. But when they did that to the village of Susia, with Nasser living there, all the world kind of suddenly came. Well, the world. Journalists from LA Times, Washington Times, New York Times, Channel 4, etc., arrived there. About 30 or 40 activists arrived the next day, the day that they were supposed to be gone or killed by the settlers' threats. And you could see in a moment that everything changes. And that night, Biden has called Netanyahu and told him to curb settler violence, to try to stop that, I don't know, I've never been there. I don't know how they really speak about it, but he said something, and this is how it came to the press. And this is a moment that basically everything changed to the better for a bit. And the next 2 weeks after that, the military arrived and kind of took many of the ruling kind of positions from the settlers back to its hands, and we were a little bit more safe, and we understood that we can maybe not guard their territory, the lands around it, the grazing lands, the agricultural lands, that the settlers continue until today to just demolish and take over, but we can maybe allow the Palestinians in these villages to stay, because once you go, you cannot go back. The villages that have gone, even after Biden has spoken, I think 5-6 times directly to the Israeli authorities, saying that settler violence is not right, that ethnic cleansing there is not right, of course, for their own reasons, right? For trying to make sure that the West Bank is not going up in flames, not for the actual people. But the villages that have been emptied are already empty, and hard to believe that they will be re-inhabited in the near future. After about 2 weeks of that kind of a little bit of calming down, the settlers understood that, yes, maybe for a minute they had to stop. Maybe they did a mistake with going to Susia and not continue with the other villages, which would make everything better for them. After a while, 2 weeks or so, they are now joined with the military in the same kind of raids, with a small difference, or a few small differences. One, that they don't do this 24 hours, you're gone or you're killed thing they did before, but just trashing the place and beating people. And another thing is that they are now kidnapping. I don't have another word for that. I mean, of course, they speak about it as arrests, but they just take young men, they leave them for a full night out in the open. And we're talking about hundreds of Palestinians, young men from the West Bank, that are being tortured on a daily basis, left in this I'm saying from friends that have been kidnapped. And we call, right? So we have people that, the activists, we call the police and the military again and again and again and again for each person that was kidnapped. And then they release him after 24 hours or 15 hours or something like that. And they tell us that many people are out there, and they are released because someone knows about them. They come back bruised and tortured, and they know they cannot rise up, because this is exactly what the military and the settlers want them to do. Well, the settlers more than the military. You rise up, and then we can really destroy your village, because we are in special times that vengeance is spoken out by everyone, not only the right wing, but also what you could call the Israeli left, Zionist left, speaking directly about the fact that there is no Palestinians that are not uninvolved in Gaza. And this, of course, ideology goes all the way to the West Bank too. And we are in the danger of the genocide in Gaza becoming something of that sort also in the West Bank. For now, they're working on ethnic cleansing. And this is where I think we need your help, or at least your knowledge about that, and the solidarity that really helps here and there to take a very violent situation and to just make it bearable, make these people pass these horrible times. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Itamar, for sharing your perspective and speaking to some of the things you've seen, some of the dynamics that are taking place on the ground, and the hardship that's being experienced by the people in Masafer Yatta and communities that have been forced also to leave. I want to turn firstly to Cheryl and Hal Hay, who had a question about the Israeli activists who stay in the villages and do this kind of immersive solidarity work. They asked, do the Palestinians accept the Israeli activists that live alongside them? And before you answer, maybe Cheryl and Hal, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, and anything else additionally you'd like to know. One moment. Should be able to unmute now.
You asked it just fine, Aris. It's exactly what I was wondering.
Okay.
Great.
This is, we're talking about 20 years of an ongoing relationship between Israeli solidarity activists under the name of Ta'ayush. So since 2002, the second Intifada, Israeli activists have come usually on a weekly basis for the day, usually just for the day, walking with the Palestinians to the areas that are close to settlements where they couldn't approach by themselves because the settlers would just kick them out. So the settlement is coming and sitting on top of Palestinian agricultural land or grazing land. And then they're starting to kind of kick out every Palestinian that comes to harvest the olives or graze their sheep. And then we would come down, or this initiative since 2002 would come down just for the day and just for walking with them in these fields close to the settlements. It took 20 years until 2021 during COVID, when a new generation was brought up both in the villages and in Israeli by these Israeli activists. So many of them are children of activists. And only then did we have enough trust from the Palestinians to actually stay the night and live with them, because we understood that maybe going along with the day to the settlement or close to the settlement sometimes helps them, the Palestinians, to harvest their land, to graze their sheep in areas that they wouldn't do otherwise. But then they go home, we drink coffee with them, we drive back to Jerusalem, and then at night the settlers are coming in and doing, just kind of, I don't know how to call that, kind of taking a price for that. And the new generation, both of Palestinian activists in these villages and Israeli activists in 2021, and which Aris actually was one of those that initiated this activity, decided to start to stay inside the villages. And they already had Palestinian activists that grew up with Israeli activists coming there, and so it's a long time of bonding. It doesn't happen. So it's a good question. It doesn't happen just like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Thanks for the question, Alan Cheryl. I'll turn it now to a related question from Maxine Kaufman Lacosta, who was curious about the network of partnerships that this project might have and operates in. So Maxine, I'll ask you to unmute now, and feel free to ask if you're there.
Sorry, you want me to repeat my question?
Yes. Or
okay. So I'm aware of delegations from groups like community peacemaker teams, formerly Christian peacemaker teams, and the Center for Jewish Nonviolence that spend 3 or 4 months at a time living in various villages in Masafer Yatta. And I wondered whether there's coordination between the Israeli groups and these foreign groups. There's probably others I don't know about.
Oh, you're pretty right. These are the CPT are already not in Hebron, if I'm not wrong. But the Jewish Center for Nonviolence is where Aris, right? Aris, you were part of that.
Yes, for many years, I was one of the organizers.
And that was the beginning. The initiative was actually together. So it was Israeli Jews and American Jews that became Israelis, some of them, that initiated it together. And the Jewish Center for Nonviolence was the one that started these Arabic courses. And the Israelis, I think, were the first ones to stay after the courses and to start to maintain a normal presence even after the Arabic courses were done. So yes, it's completely, but there's no others. So now it's kind of the same people. They're not really even calling themselves by any name. Thank you, Maxine.
Thanks, Maxine. Thanks, Itamar. And Maureen, you had a question about the dynamics on the ground after you heard reports that activists were being prohibited from visiting villages in solidarity. Would you like to ask? You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi there. I was with CPT in Tawani between 2004 and 2009. And one other group that was there was Operazione Colomba, the Italian group, Operation Dove. I know that in O'Hare, recently they've been told they're not allowed international visitors. And I also know from the villagers group that, you know, some families elsewhere have asked them not to visit because after every visit, there's a visit from the Israeli so-called military settlers.
Yes.
I wondered, you know, have any villages been told that they're not allowed Israeli activists to visit or to stay?
Thank you, Maureen. You're right. I forgot about the Operazione Colomba, Operation Dove, and the ISM is International Solidarity Movement, both of which live in Tawane, one of those main villages, and do the same activity. Recently, they had more problems, and they just they basically fled. I think 2 weeks ago or so, after one of the ISM activists was arrested and accused of supporting terrorist organization. And before they actually put her to trial, they just kicked her out of the country. And then the 2 other ISM, International Solidarity Movement activists, just fled too because they knew it's coming to them. This was done by the police, but you're right that both Israeli military and Israeli settlers come and regularly threaten them that any sort of activists, both Israelis or internationals, will be a reason for them to trash the place, to kill them. It depends each situation, but generally frightening them. This has been happening forever, and it is a decision of each village of how to take these threats, and also of the activists, but a little less so. So some villages are afraid of having Israelis or international solidarity activists because it might cost them their lives or might be the reason to be kicked out. While I believe, and of course I can just, say it from my point of view, but that it is not the case, that actually the presence is what makes it possible for them to stay. However, if you're there for a night or 2 or 3 as an activist, and then you're gone for a day or 2 or 3, the settlers see it because they all the time come with drones above, and then they will come to revenge. So it's really a kind of a horrible decision that they have to take. Most of the villages prefer that we will be there. And yes, Israeli activists have more security there. So for the international ones, when they arrive, they will pass something not just as the Palestinians, but they can be very badly treated by the settlers. While Israelis, it would be still a step too far. They feel that we are more protected. It is hard for them, maybe emotionally, to in front of a different Jew. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Thanks, Itamar. Thanks, Maureen. I have a question here that I think I'll just read for the sake of time. Nick Sherwood asked, how much do we know about the present status of IDF refuseniks, like yourself? How many were there prior to October 7th? Have there been any now? Have any people gone public with their own accounts of what they are being ordered to do now?
Yeah. Who is the person?
Nick Sherwood asked.
Okay, hi Nick. Yeah, almost nothing. We are talking about really, really small numbers of refuseniks, 2, 3, 4 every year or so. Maybe Aris will correct me if it's not exactly that, somewhere there. People that refuse to actually go to the war itself publicly and proudly saying, I'm not going, and not just kind of looking for a way out. Nothing, almost zero. So at the time, I think in my time, and I see that you are closer to my age than the activists that I'm following. So 20 years ago, when I went out, refuseniks, or it was a big thing. We thought that this can really be a game changer. Come out, we speak out, we are the soldiers that we refuse to, and so on. This kind of shattered in our faces when somewhere in the 2005, 6, and now it's really small numbers, and they have no influence whatsoever. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the perspective and response. I think, unfortunately, we have time for maybe just one more question. Alan on the call had a question about global solidarity in this moment and what can be done. Alan, if you're still here, would you like to ask? You should be able to unmute. Alan, are you here? In that case, I'll read his question. Alan asked, what message can we pass on to our MPs in the UK to help? I feel so sad that all our global mechanisms seem to have so seriously failed the people of Palestine and Israel. What can we do to accelerate the changes needed to the UN? A worthy question. And I thought any response to that from you would be great. And then if you want to add anything more about what solidarity in this moment means locally and globally.
Okay, I'll try to. It's a big question, of course. What can be done? I was, for many years, I stopped supporting the two-state solution because I thought it's not really treating the Palestinian Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of 1948. It's not going to the root problem. And I was confronting many diplomats and people that thought that this is the only solution, the two-state solution, which basically means that Israel keeps what it took in 1948, 78% of the land, and the state of Palestine will be more or less in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, something like 28% of the land. And I used to think it's not a good idea. I think now, if there is one thing that when I try to think about not just like a moral stance, but as a practical stance that can also align the interests of the big powers like America, the UK, Canada, and so on, NATO. And since we're standing in front of a genocide in the Gaza Strip and a possible and an ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and a possible genocide also there, and also a possible civil war within the Israelis, this made me think about what could be interests of mine, of Palestinians, of activists, and of those great powers that never really cared for Palestinians. And I think that a two-state solution imposed on Israel after this genocide is over in Gaza, after Biden says, okay, you killed enough, 20, 30, 40,000 people. Now we tell you what to do. Your situation is chaotic. We need the Arab world with us, which is almost not with us. And therefore, we are going to impose a two-state solution with NATO being the force inside the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In the beginning, the military force, because no one will give the Palestinians a military. And again, I'm saying this is not the moral stance, but the realistic stance of something that could also be pushed to. NATO is the one that has the security issues of this new Palestinian state. They guard the Palestinians. The settlements are, some of them in, some of them out, and impose a kind of a new Pax Americana, if you want, saying this is how we do it here. We are a great democracy. We're standing in front of the axis of evil. We're bringing peace to here. We're doing all this Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. It brings back Turkey, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, of course, and it will make the axis of evil, as they call it, the Iran and Putin side, look a lot worse, because they will bring this kind of like a lot of investments, a lot of things, and democracy kept by NATO. This will enhance NATO army and legitimacy in the world that is now crumbling, will help the war in Ukraine, and basically for us, it will stop the genocide and the ethnic cleansing. It will not fix everything, but now in this kind of very stressful times that we are in front of a world war, this Gaza thing can turn into a world war very, very easily. And this could be a step that will give another 20 years of a so-called liberal Pax Americana or something like that. This is something I would push now. It is not something I would say 2 months ago if someone would ask me, what should we do? I would advocate something completely different. The return of the refugees from 1948, a full democratic state in Israel-Palestine, a confederacy, if you want, something of that sort, things that were not feasible in the political arena, because Palestinians just don't have the political power to do that, because Israel is completely aligned with the United States. And I would be ashamed even to say such a thing as I was saying now. But facing now this horrific genocide in Gaza, and standing on a verge of a world war, this is something that I say, yeah, I'll vote for Biden if he does that.
Thanks, Itamar. And it's going to be interesting for all of us to see what kind of geopolitical alignments and strategies take form, and how the landscape we've all operated in, whether we're here or abroad, has shifted in the wake of this in the next years, etc. I guess coming off of that, because unfortunately we have to wind down soon, I wanted to turn to you and ask you if you want to share anything personally about what it's felt like or meant to you to lean into solidarity work in this time, to be in the South Urban Hills, to be in direct contact with what's happening, to be in relationship there, and what it's you, and what your experience has meant during this time in those things.
Yeah. Yeah, so I must say that emotionally, I'm not 100%, as I think many people around here are not. We are traumatized, all of us, and I think I find comfort when I'm there. So a lot of the craziness comes from the screens. Seeing horrors, seeing both the actual horrors and the way that people speak about it, and friends that are completely supportive of genocide, and these things just makes a person go crazy. A person, I mean, in my situation at least, as I'm losing many friends, family members that is harder to speak to, if at all. And then when I go to the West Bank and I live with Palestinians, something becomes a lot more simple. You actually do something. You're less in the, you actually feel that you contribute just with your privileges of being Jewish there. Just being in a village might make people feel more safe. Sometimes they are a little more safe for sure, and sometimes not, but it takes your mind off the other horrors. So I don't update myself a lot about what's happening in Gaza. I can't handle it, and there is some kind of peace of mind in a way confronting settlers and military, because it's you de-escalate situation, you find yourself a little useful and so on. Emotionally, it's really every time I come back, I go there for about 4 or 5 days, and then I come back for about a week and a half in Haifa, where I live. In the first 2 days, I feel great after I come back, and then slowly it starts to deteriorate, understanding that everyone around me almost is either indifferent or fully supportive of a genocide. It's something, I grew up with the Holocaust in my background, my family, and I grew up knowing that that if I was there, I would take the right side. If I was a Jew, I would run away and try to fight the Nazis, stop the genocide from happening. If I was a German, and so on. And you always have this kind of education, and people always say, don't be, this little memes, be that guy with a circle around, one person standing, everyone is hailing Hitler, and there's one person that doesn't, and it says, be that guy. And everyone around you knows that they will be in the right place, but then when it arrives, everyone is full of wish to revenge. And really good people around me, family, they just say they're not humans, or they brought it on themselves. And it's horrible, because it's times that we actually have access to this information. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Aris.
Thanks, Itamar. Thanks for the personal and invaluable perspective. It's deeply appreciated, especially in this time, and it's not taken for granted that you made time to be with us and speak and share and talk so earnestly with everyone here. So with that, unfortunately, we're out of time for today. I hope that all of us, as Itamar said, find the ways to lean into the kinds of solidarity and activities that are meaningful for us, that sustain us, that help us to stay grounded in the values and the larger vision of justice that we hold. And I'm really appreciating that from this talk. Thanks also to all of you from around the world who joined as we came together to express our solidarity in this way, and hear directly from activists on the ground calling for an immediate ceasefire, a release of all the hostages, and an end of collective punishment, both in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We hope, as we say every week, that we will all take what you heard today as a charge towards action in a moment in which we as a global community must do everything we can to demand a release of all of the hostages and an immediate ceasefire. Now is the time to write your elected officials, sign petitions, demonstrate, attend town halls, disrupt meetings, act in civil disobedience, share what you learned today with your peers, and do all we can to amplify the voices of Palestinians and Israelis calling for a democratic future beyond war. We hope you will join us this Wednesday for our next webinar of Solidarity Speaks on the 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern with Basman Dirawi of We Are Not Numbers, a psychotherapist who has not been able to return to his home in the Al-Rama neighborhood of Gaza City since October 7th. He was attending a course in physiotherapy in Egypt through the Palestine Ministry of Health when aggressions began. And he will join us to speak about how his community, his family, and his world has been impacted. Our thoughts are with all of you around the world, especially everyone participating in demonstrations. And we hope everyone here has peaceful days. So with that, we hope to see everyone soon. Thanks again, Itamar. And thanks to everyone who joined. Have lovely days. Masafer.